Three, two, one, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.
All right, we're recording. Michael Sampson, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here.
I'm psyched that you're here as well. I mean, I think that there's a lot that we can discuss, you being the Senior Director of Legal Affairs and Risk Management at Symphony Risk, excuse me. So, this is going to be a legal discussion today as it relates to the cannabis industry, but I know that it's very relevant, right? I mean,
Absolutely. And I teach a law school class on cannabis in the law. So, we'll try to keep it at a higher level and not get lost in, legal doctrine and legal jargon. But, happy to be here. As you said, I'm at Symphony Risk. Just coming up on my 5-month anniversary after being in private practice for about 20 years and got an opportunity to join Symphony Risk and Symphony Grow, which is our cannabis business, and it was a large reason for coming over, just because it's unparalleled, and so I'm excited to be there, and I'm excited to be here with you today, and as you said, discuss any of many legal topics and non-legal topics.
perfect. No, that's great. And I think, a good legal topic maybe to just dig into right off the bat is this, this constitutional debate over cannabis licensing residency requirements.
Yeah.
I'm curious, right? Like, what's the rationale behind these states imposing residency requirements for cannabis licenses, and why are these requirements, why have they been found largely unconstitutional in your view?
Yeah, this goes back to an absolutely arcane element of constitutional law that most law students forget about after their first semester of law school, but has become a big topic in the cannabis industry, and that's the Dormant Commerce Clause, which of course nobody's ever heard of, and as I said, most law students forget after first semester. But the idea is that a lot of states and even municipalities have tried to enact laws or regulations that says if you want a cannabis license to grow, to sell, whatever it may be in that particular state, you have to be a resident of that state. And, we could probably both guess and, kind of come up with various reasons, but I think at the end of the day, it's largely protectionist to help various residents of the states get licenses and protect their own residents. And so,
Sure.
at the end,
Also, probably to stop, like, I guess big players from going to one state to another, right? Because of the different laws as it relates to each state.
I suspect that's some of it. I mean, if you look at what happened, in alcohol, which was a very similar situation, Tennessee tried to enact licensee law like this for alcohol, and they came forward with a whole bunch of purported reasons. It would stop excess consumption because people would know, who their neighbors were that were buying. And the Supreme Court in that case wasn't very taken with that argument. And basically the same thing is happening here. I mean, there's under this doctrine of the Dormant Commerce Clause, states cannot favor their own residents over those of residents of other states. And it's a pretty clear doctrine. And where the wrinkle comes in, of course, is the fact that the fact that it's illegal federally, cannabis, and does the fact that it's illegal federally in some way affect this constitutional principle? And what the courts have largely, not exclusively, but largely said is no. These are clear-cut instances of states trying to benefit their own residents over that of another state, which is, per se impermissible under constitutional law. And then they've said, wait a second, we're not going to let you legalize cannabis and then use the illegality of cannabis to try to avoid the application of the Dormant Commerce Clause. And so they've said no. For the most part, they've said that even though this is a federally illegal substance, the Dormant Commerce Clause still applies, and have been very leery of allowing these types of state licensing restrictions to apply. The probably the preeminent case is a case out of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit that struck down Maine law, a Maine law, M-A-I-N-E, that tried to benefit Maine residents. So there have been some outliers, but all in all, these issues are being decided pretty much against the states, and it's really a neat application of an arcane, as I said, constitutional law principle. We're teaching it in cannabis and the law at Pitt. We're also teaching it. I teach constitutional law at Pitt too, and we use this as a case study because it's so unusual.
Let's talk about the implications of these legal decisions, right? Like how could it impact the cannabis industry if they're passed?
There's a couple things going on. One, obviously, it opens up who's eligible for a license, right? So, for example, in Maine, it was only Maine residents that were allowed. The court struck that down, which allows, for greater competition for licenses. But there's actually a second side to this too, which is the Dormant Commerce Clause prohibits states from interfering with interstate commerce. And the kind of prototypical example of that is 50 years ago, a case out of Iowa, where Iowa had their own standards for what type of truck trailers could pass through the state. And it was completely out of line with the rest of the country. And the Supreme Court struck down that law, saying that impermissibly burdened interstate commerce. Because if somebody was trying to drive a truck across the United States, they would either have to avoid Iowa or switch out their trailers. We're going to start, I predict, seeing similar things in the cannabis industry, especially once cannabis becomes legalized federally. Because then if states have regulations, whether it's a limit on THC or certain labeling restrictions that are so far out of line with what the rest of the country is doing, we're likely to see challenges to those type of regulations under the Dormant Commerce Clause as well. I mean, we're going to need to have some sort of uniform regulatory structure
Right.
so that a multi-state operator doesn't have to basically go to the lowest common denominator. If every other state's allowing something to happen, but one state has got its own set of regulations, that's a burden on interstate commerce. And so I suspect we're going to see the Dormant Commerce Clause challenges play out in another realm once cannabis essentially becomes legal federally.
It's so interesting because the cannabis industry is so dynamic, right? There's like so many layers to it when you think about federal, the federal level, and then you got the state level, and then you got the local level. And, when you brought up that example of interstate commerce and how in some cases, like, they'd have to avoid driving through the state. I mean, that's happening right now in California, right? When it comes to the municipality level, like there's some municipalities that have opted out. So therefore you can't even drive the product through. They have to find different routes. Is that correct?
I think that's right. And certainly we saw that in Idaho a couple years ago when they were seizing, transports through the state, even though they weren't stopping. And I think you're exactly right, Kevin. I mean, this is what makes this so much fun and so cool for a legal nerd like myself is, I would challenge anybody to come up with any other industry in the history of the United States that has ever been like this, federally illegal, but state legal. Even alcohol during the the Prohibition era wasn't like that. The variety of what goes on, as you said, in California, the opt-ins, opt-outs, it's what kind of drew me to this in the first place. And then every time we've seen another issue, whether it's through insurance or risk management or any of the other things that Symphony Grow and I have worked on, it's just a new challenge and a new application, and it's always almost a fun brain teaser, again, for a legal nerd such as myself.
Yeah, it's mental gymnastics in a way. And, I love that you brought up interstate commerce because I want to explore that more. And, I haven't followed up in this particular topic, but I know there was talks of California, and I think it was it Oregon that were like, hey, in fact, interstate commerce is legal. We are two states that are online. I don't know exactly what their argument was or what side they were coming from, but let's talk about that. Like, and how has that played out thus far?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the interest that Oregon in particular had about exporting cannabis, because for a while they had a glut and were looking to do something and wanted to export it to other states. I mean,
Yes.
right now, I think it's pretty clear that that would be federally illegal. It's federally illegal to take cannabis across state lines, to distribute, transport it across state lines. Know that at least at one point, Oregon was making arguments as to why they should be allowed to do it. But to my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet. And to my assessment, it's a pretty uphill climb just because of where we stand today, under federal law when it comes to cannabis. I mean, there's a lot of different arguments people make when they want to talk about what federal law really is. There's a early case out of the U.S. District Court for Colorado, which talks about the difference between de jure and de facto cannabis laws in this country, because it recognizes that cannabis is illegal, but then it looks at things like the fact that there's a there was the sorry, I'm trying to blank the Cole memo. I apologize. The
No,
Cole
you're
memo
fine.
and Rohrabaugh Blumenauer that essentially meant the United States had these laws on the book, but that they weren't being enforced. And so, even though there's these kind of deviations from the norm, cannabis is still federally legal, and that really prohibits any transfer of cannabis across state lines. Obviously, if and when that changes, it'll affect the market from both a supply and demand standpoint. But right now, cannabis, as I'm sure know, Kevin, the industry is very much a vertical, state specific. It has to happen within the borders of the state, and that's because of the status of federal law.
Hmm. Well, I mean, and speaking of, at the federal level, right? Let's talk about HHS's recent recommendation to the DEA to reschedule, right? To Schedule 3 as opposed to what its current schedule is 1. And I mean, there's really not much, I mean, that would change, really. I mean, in terms of like the FDA would be able to at least recognize it, and medically there'd be some benefits, but from the legal standpoint, I mean, right? I mean, what? No one would be released from prison, would they?
I don't, you're right. I think that's probably correct. Although we've seen some of the federal initiatives from the Biden administration, when it comes to cannabis in prison. I think, what we might see if it changed to Schedule 3 was some incremental changes in insurance companies or financial institutions willing to do business with the cannabis industry, because it would no longer be, absolutely illegal. But I
Mhm.
think, until we see basically full-on legalization, we're unlikely to see, really everybody rushing into the industry, who didn't want to participate before, be it insurance companies or banks or whoever, financial institutions, credit card companies, et cetera. So I think, we're still looking for that, that home run. But I think, every base hit helps, and, some change is good, so long as it doesn't end there, and, that Congress or DHS or the FDA doesn't think that, HHS or the FDA doesn't think that their job is done. Because until we see that kind of full scale change, I think, we're not going to see the results that everybody's looking for as far as, making the industry mainstream and completely stable.
Right. Hmm. Well, let's switch gears. You talked about, insurance companies, right? And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the importance of insurance in the cannabis industry from, a product liability standpoint to cyber insurance.
You got it. And that's what Symphony Risk does, and Symphony Grow does. We are the preeminent cannabis broker out there. The depth of knowledge, and it's really, really important for the cannabis industry to know why insurance is so necessary. Obviously, insurance is a risk transfer mechanism, and it's a risk heavy industry. And the same way that the drugstore or even the ice cream shop down the street has insurance to protect against any number of risks, whether it's fire or somebody slipping and falling, the cannabis industry and cannabis businesses need that same type of insurance. They need insurance on their property, if in case there was a fire. They need general liability insurance in case somebody slips and falls. But they also need, as you brought up, product liability insurance because they are selling products just like anybody who's selling products would need. But these products come with extra level of scrutiny. They're ingestibles, they're topicals, and so having the type of insurance that if somebody gets sick or something goes wrong protects you is key. But it's also key, as you said, Kevin. I mean, it doesn't just stop there. And I think a lot of folks in the industry think, okay, property insurance, product liability insurance, I'm all set. Cyber insurance is such a huge consideration and of such significant importance for the industry because, think about all the data that a dispensary is collecting, whether it's driver's license or names or, perhaps medical information. And as we all see every day, right, there's all sorts of cyber events, bad events happening, whether they are cyber attacks or ransomware, whatever it might be, right? Anybody who's collecting lots and lots of data is at risk. And so cannabis businesses, especially dispensaries, collect a lot of data. And there's generally a lot of entry points to that data, whether it's at the state level where the data is feeding into, or at the dispensary level. And so there's risk. And as we all know today, that cyber risk is growing and growing. And so it's really important for cannabis businesses, like any other business, and maybe even more so than other businesses, to make sure they have cyber insurance. And then, of course, there's any number of other insurance products that they need to consider, whether it's directors and officers insurance, or professional liability. Here in Pennsylvania, where I am, for example, you have to have a pharmacist or a doctor on duty in one of your dispensaries. That pharmacist or doctor needs to be covered, needs professional liability insurance, malpractice insurance, if you will. You also need auto insurance. Think about the transport of cannabis. And I think the other thing that people need to think about, and it's something we spend a lot of time, talking to clients about, is making sure you understand your risk. So if all of a sudden you start doing delivery, for example, you're going to have different risks and need different types of insurance. So, it's really important for a cannabis business to know what their risks are, know what the potential liabilities look like, and to think about how do I protect myself in case something bad happens, in case there's a theft. And we've seen all sorts of examples of, things that have happened across the industry. Crime insurance, hugely important. We've seen what's happened in the West Coast. And so each of these things are a way of mitigating risk and protecting it. And if you work with a broker, like Symphony Grow, you deal with it once, you get the focus in place, you protect yourself, and that allows you to go worry about all the other things about your business and know that your insurance is taken care of and you're protected.
Mm-hmm. No, that's helpful that you ran through the different types of insurance coverages that are available to the cannabis specific businesses. And I mean, do you want to talk about the challenges and opportunities in obtaining comprehensive insurance?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, still more challenging than perhaps in other industries. And it goes back to what you and I were talking about at the beginning, which is the federal illegality. Insurance companies like banks are not rushing into the industry to, and are keeping their distance. There are a lot, and those are the big mainstream insurance companies. But at the same time, there are lots and lots of insurance companies that are willing to provide insurance to the cannabis industry, meaningful insurance. And so a cannabis related business should be able to find the insurance they need to cover all their risks. The options may not be the same as they would be in every other industry, but there are sufficient options. So, I mean, we constantly are working with clients across the industry, and this goes for dispensaries, growers, processors, ancillary producers. The key is, making sure you have the right type of insurance and the right amount of insurance. And we, routinely work with clients to make sure they have what they need. I think, once federal legalization occurs, or even the Safe Banking Act or similar legislation gets passed that protects the financial institutions, protects insurance companies, more insurers are likely to come into the market, which will increase supply, hopefully drive rates down, just from a pure economic supply and demand outlook. But I think the thing that's really important is it's amazing. I'll still hear sometimes, oh, cannabis businesses can't get insurance. That's absolutely not true. I mean, Symphony works with big and small growers, dispensaries, and are able to find insurance for anybody who wants it. And it's just a prudent thing for cannabis businesses to do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, talk to me about the litigation landscape in the cannabis industry. There's this increasing trend of litigation involving cannabis-related businesses. What trends are you seeing?
Yeah, for a while, we used to think we were kind of in a pre-litigation world in cannabis. That has gone by the wayside. We certainly see litigation involving the cannabis industry as you would any other industry, whether they're product liability suits. There have been any number of directors and officers lawsuits after transactions involving in particular publicly traded cannabis companies. We've seen insurance coverage suits. There's issues over breakups of cannabis businesses. So I think, what we're seeing now is a healthy dose of litigation. And that really, Kevin, raises a whole nother point, which is when you buy insurance, it doesn't just cover you if you have to pay somebody for a loss or something like that. It will also cover you, generally speaking, if you have to defend against a lawsuit. And won't surprise you, of course, that defending against lawsuits, especially in this day and age, can be expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so the value of insurance, even if you ultimately get out of a case, even if the case is frivolous, even if you ultimately, win the case, you can still run up significant exposure and significant defense costs. So having insurance is worth it just for that purpose, because, no matter how well you lead your business, no matter how appropriately you behave, it's still very possible, almost through no fault of your own, that you'll get sued by somebody who's unhappy. And so having insurance that protects and pays for those defense costs is a hugely important asset that any cannabis-related business can have.
What are some other strategies and best practices businesses can take to protect themselves if they
Yeah,
face a lawsuit?
when they face a lawsuit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's really important, and I spent 20 years in private practice, including at one of the largest law firms in the world, and we're seeing more large law firms develop cannabis practices. At the same time, there's a number of attorneys out there who call themselves cannabis attorneys. Maybe they defended a driving while intoxicated or a small possession charge, and therefore go out and call themselves cannabis attorneys. I used to tell my clients all the time when I'm in private practice, and I still tell clients of ours at Symphony now, if you get sued, you want to hire, sophisticated counsel. You have the same risk as a cannabis related business that, again, the drugstore has, the car dealership has, right? And there's a lot of money at stake. And the dirty little secret I also like to say about cannabis law, such as it is it's 90% the same as for everything else, with about 10% issue spotting on top. You have to be able to identify why it's not quite like the rest of the world. But you want somebody, if you get sued for a products liability case, you want a products liability attorney, maybe with some input from a cannabis team member who could say, well, no, we don't need to call the FDA because it's not FDA approved. But you don't want to just hire some random cannabis attorney. You want sophisticated, there's a lot of money at play. You want sophisticated representation. And I always stress that with clients. I just think it's really important, and like it is any other type of business, and so certainly protecting yourself with good counsel, retaining documents that can be, it can be important, preserving evidence, communicating with counsel, not through others, that you're not waiving the privilege. But really, getting good lawyers in place early will help drive all of the things that follow from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you also talked about like the importance of cyber insurance, because of like the emergence of cyber attacks today. So I would think there's also proactive risk mitigation strategies, right? When it comes to cyber controls or things that you can do in terms of physical security to be safe. I mean, the fact that there's a lack of baking, right, overall in the industry or the majority of the industry, they're kind of at risk for different types of break-ins and crimes, right?
Absolutely. You're right on both accounts, both kind of physical security and also cyber security. On physical security, the fact that it's still largely a cash industry raises all sorts of risks. Again, we've seen that in Oakland, California. We've seen that, in Washington and Oregon State, even some in, New York State, those risks. But so taking, smart precautions, as far as, lighting, coordinating with the local police force so they know who you are, as well as, making sure that you have locking doors, points of ingress and egress are protected. And I mean, the other thing is, Kevin, with that, almost every state has regulations that go to security. The type of glass that has to sit in an exterior window, the type of safe that has to be used. And so it's really important that you know those regulations and you comply with them, because compliance with them is also going to be a key factor to safeguarding your insurance. And, if you tell your insurer you're going to have a certain type of rated safe and you don't have it and something happens, you may be out insurance. And so it's really important that you take a holistic look and understand the regulations, understand your insurance policy, understand best practices as well. And the same goes on the cyber side. We're seeing it across all industries. It's not unique to cannabis. You have multi-factor authentication.
Mm-hmm.
You have other types of controls in place. And those are going to be important, again, just from a standard, like, are we protecting ourselves? But also are going to be important building blocks on which your insurance is going to sit. So all these things go hand in hand. And, I think you're alluding to the fact that each of these cannabis businesses out there need to have a comprehensive risk mitigation plan. And it takes in physical security, it takes in cyber security. How do you treat your employees? I mean, remember, God forbid there's something bad happens, you can always replace products and, inventory. You can't replace people. So it involves training people. How do you respond to an adverse act? How to protect themselves. It involves security awareness, security training, cyber, insurance. All of these things go into a holistic plan that help keep cannabis businesses safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, one last question on the topic of minimizing risks. So, and I'm particularly interested in this one, and that's text-based cannabis marketing, right? So there are so many risks associated with text-based marketing in the cannabis industry. So let's kind of touch on some of those, and what are the applicable laws, regulations, and guidelines that govern cannabis marketing practices?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great question, and it's a great place also that kind of says you got to go back and look at the applicable laws and regulations. You're exactly right. Because what is happening, and we've seen it across all industries, and there was a rash of it for a while, including against the cannabis industry, is it's called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, the TCPA. And there's lots of state equivalents. They're called mini TCPAs or things like that. But basically what they say is these are robocall laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you put yourself on the do not disturb lists, you can't receive emails, text messages rather, or phone calls. Or you can't just simply get unsolicited text messages. You have to opt in. And text message advertising, as you know, has become a very prevalent advertising approach. And so what we saw, for a while was going strong, is somebody would get one text message that, they would claim they didn't sign up for or that they didn't want. And all of a sudden they would turn that into a large class action lawsuit seeking, hundreds of thousands of dollars because each text comes with its own kind of statutory penalty. And so, it's an easily avoidable, risk because you make sure that you're getting, documentation that you have permission to send the text messages to somebody. You have what's called a double opt-in. So after they give you permission in the store, the first text message that goes to them says, please confirm that you want to receive, text Y to
Right.
confirm,
Or stop if you don't want to receive
or
these
stop,
anymore. Yeah.
and making sure that if you get that stop, you actually honor it, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and
Yeah, Washington Post. Man, they don't let me unsubscribe. I've done it several times and they just keep me
well,
on their opt-in list. Anyway,
I
I
don't know about the
digress.
Post, but I have plenty of my own. We've often joked because we litigated that issue at a previous firm that I could make a lot of money by everybody who keeps texting me. I mean, the reality is, right, it's a nuisance, and most of us, 98% of us, just hit delete and go on with life. But there's always an opportunist out there who starts seeing, dollar signs, or plaintiff's counsel who sees an opportunity. And again, you talked about stop. Do you have a policy in place that says what to do when you get a stop? Are you honoring it? Are you keeping good records? And this goes, record keeping goes to all the things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're keeping good records, then when somebody comes to you with a frivolous claim and says, "I never gave you my consent," you say, "Aha, yes, you did. Here it is."
Right.
Same thing when other things happen. And so, it's using best practices. Again, these aren't unique to the cannabis industry, but the cannabis industry is a young, tech-savvy industry that likes to use, novel ways of marketing. So, I mean, Visa is doing it too. They got hit with like $1 billion lawsuit. So it's not like it's unusual, but it's going on. And how do you protect it? You can write contracts that say, if I use a third-party vendor, then I want and they screw up, then they've got to cover, pay for me. There's also some limited insurance out there occasionally that you can find for TCPA claims, but understanding what the risk is, and this is what we, at Symphony Grow and Symphony Risk do all the time, is understand what risk the company is facing, and then find insurance, for example, that helps protect it. And so if you use these risk mitigation steps, they decrease the risk, right? But risk, you can never eliminate risk. And so having insurance in the back, works hand in hand with these risk mitigation tools to try to protect, cannabis related businesses. And that's what it's all about, right? It's about reducing the risk and protecting the business, because anybody who's in this industry has a lot invested: time, money, their name, everything. And we want to make sure that they're protected, and they ought to want to make sure they're protected, so they can go focus on, what they do best, which is running a business.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, Michael, I want to ask you, I want to shift gears and talk about you and your experience as a current professor teaching cannabis law, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. And, tell me a little bit about like how you see like the importance of legal education in advancing the industry and shaping informed legal practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool. I designed this class for University of Pittsburgh Law School, and we were one of the first, if not the first, law school to teach cannabis in the law. And I always tell the students the first day, kind of what I said to you a little bit ago, that there's no magic to cannabis law. It's, issue spotting on top of real estate law, on top of contract law, on top of insurance law. But I think, first of all, the ability to issue spot and integrate kind of new ideas into older, more established fields is a really challenging issue, and a really important learning experience. But the other thing I tell my students is that the days when you could kind of wall off the cannabis industry are long gone. So even if you're not an attorney in the cannabis industry, you're not working for an MSO or a grower, but you're working for an accounting firm or a lighting firm, you're going to interact with the cannabis industry today. And so you've got to understand, how a novel industry affects your work even for outside the cannabis industry. You're not an in-house attorney for a cannabis industry, you're in-house for a department store. But are you going to sell cannabis branded clothing? What are the rights? Represented a university previously out in the Midwest that wanted to hold a cannabis conference. Can you do that? Are you taking a risk by taking money from the cannabis businesses? And so there's lots of questions that are coming up, and it goes hand in hand with insurance too, because not every insurance policy is going to fit. And so if you're outside the cannabis industry and thinking about moving into it, you got to be thinking, does my insurance fit? Is it congruent, or do I need to go out and buy new insurance that will apply or help me because cannabis is still legal and is treated a little bit differently. And so
Right.
these are the types of subjects we work through with the students in the class. We cover everything, as I said, from insurance to name, image, and likeness rules in NCAA sports, from contracts back to the Dormant Commerce Clause, where we started. And it's kind of a crash course over the course of a semester, and really enjoyed teaching it, and really grateful to Pitt for letting me teach it.
Yeah, it sounds super interesting and something that I wish was available when I went to college. I mean, I
We'll,
didn't
we'll
take
get
the
you.
legal path, but I mean, if cannabis law was a topic, I mean, I think I'd be interested.
Well, we'll get you to come sit in or do a guest lecture, Kevin. You come talk about advertising and podcasts and all the issues that come around what you do. We try to do that, actually. We try to get the students, guest lecturers, because it makes it a lot more interesting and a lot more real than listening to me talk.
Mix
But
it up.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll put you on the short list for next semester's class.
I'd love that. I'd love that, Michael. Thank you for that opportunity. Yeah, that'd be fun.
it's
Awesome.
it's it's a lot of fun, and it's something different, and very, very proud of it. And it's a great, it comes out of having dealt with all these issues, and we take all these topics to heart when we're looking at a coverage at Symphony. And as I said at the beginning, it's really kind of cool because there's never been an industry like this, and the legal application is really novel, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. As you said earlier, as a legal nerd, you're in the right space, man.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely.
Never a
Nobody will ever
boring
argue
day.
that I'm not. Well, I'll leave you with this, Kevin. I don't know if you've ever heard the song "Alice's Restaurant" by Arlo Guthrie.
I'm not
It's an
sure I have.
old anti-war song. It goes on, you ought to listen to it. It goes on for about 25 minutes. It's a lengthy story.
Okay.
And Arlo Guthrie's telling the story of being in front of the draft board one day, and he had littered, was convicted of littering, and therefore was disqualified in the song from serving in the Vietnam War. And so he says he's sitting on the bench in the Vietnam, draft board, and he tells everybody. They said, well, he's sitting there. He says, with mother rapers and father stabbers, father rapers and mother stabbers, and they say, "Kid, what are you in for?" And he says, "Well, I'm in for littering." And he says, all the these big guys all move away from him, and he says, "And for creating a nuisance," and they all come back and have a great time. And I often analogize my experience in the law to that, because if I tell everybody that I'm an insurance coverage attorney, everybody moves away. But only when I say, "And for the cannabis industry," does everybody come back and
Right.
interested. So it's a great opportunity, from a legal profession, and I'm thrilled to be able to join Symphony now and kind of work with TJ Frost and others at Symphony Grow to continue what I've been doing, but doing it from a different perspective.
That's a great way to put it, Michael. Yeah, and I mean that's what's the beauty of this industry, right? Is that it brings in so many different industry professionals to really help build this thing up and move it in a direction that we all kind of want to see. We're all kind of building this plane as it's flying,
That's exactly
and
right.
it's we're all adding value in some way. So keep it up, man. Really appreciate your time today and all the great legal insights. So where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
They can get me various ways. The easiest way is on my email account, which is msampson, MSAMPSON, at symphonyrisk.com. So msampson at symphonyrisk.com. Symphonyrisk.com will tell you all about what we do generally, and take a look at Symphony Grow, which is our cannabis business, and love the opportunity to work with your listeners, and really appreciate your having me on. It's been a lot of fun, and appreciate everybody slogging through the legal stuff.
No, you made it fun, man, and it was very insightful. So thanks again, and hey, thank you all for listening. Bye.
Kevin.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.